tonight. First off, a little bit about ecological tolerance, and followed by natural disruptions in the ecosystem, how those natural disruptions tend to lead to adaptations for survival. And then it's not just organisms that have to adapt or are changing, of course. The ecosystems themselves are. So we're going to talk about ecological succession. I've got to take my watch off. It's just being annoying. Haven't been used to wearing a watch for like about 2.5 weeks. Anytime I want to know the time, I just look up, and if there's sunlight, it's daytime. And if there's not sunlight, it's nighttime. I don't even know what day of the week it is nowadays. Pretty much like the rest of y'all, I'm quite sure. How many of y'all are basically on furlough? You are not allowed at school whatsoever. I'm betting it's pretty close to all of y'all, isn't it? I'm in Texas, and our governor said we are not allowed back in our classroom until May the 4th, which is a pretty special day if you're a Star Wars fan. All right. So I like to lead off every little section here with a question. Let's see if you guys can help me out here. Imagine your absolute favorite food in the world. How would you react if you could never eat that food ever again? How would you react if it was the only food you could ever eat again? How are they different? How would you feel if you could never eat your favorite food ever again? It was totally off the menu. You could get over it, yeah. You would be heartbroken, I'm quite sure. Okay, well, what if die from heartache? Oh, that would be sad right there. Well, okay, so right there, Melanie's adapting to change like a couple others. All right, so what if the only thing you could eat was your favorite food? Nothing else. That was it. Yeah, most people would get tired of it, I'm quite sure. It's great at first. Like even my students right now was like, they had an extended spring break. They had an extended spring break, and then I got to talk to them virtually, like most other people are doing right now. And they're like, "Oh my gosh, it is so boring sitting in my house." It's like, this is basically what you guys always want. Never have to go to school. They go, "Yeah, this is not really cool." So, same thing happens here. If this was the only food you could ever eat, it's probably good at first, and then the nostalgia kind of wears off on it, wouldn't it? Heart attack, yeah. Okay, Grace, how would you die of a heart attack? Is it full of grease and all the good stuff in the world? Yep, that's what I figured. Alrighty. Who's talking to me? My watch is just lit up. Alright, don't worry about it. This is important now, not my watch. Okay, so the reason why I ask those questions, it kind of goes into what we call ecological tolerance, or basically your tolerance levels. If you notice the graph right there, we like to be in the middle, kind of like that Goldilocks zone. We like to stay right there where if we have just enough of something, we are perfectly fine. But if we start getting too much or too little, it kind of gets a little stressful. All right, that's what we call ecological succession. It's lots of different conditions that could, again, either cause an organism or an entire population in an area to become stressed. And now, of course, when you become stressed, it's not a problem. It could be hurtful. It could be a little bit of a pain. But when you go beyond that stress, that intolerance right there, that's right when death starts to occur. Again, look at the angle of that graph, right where it starts to slope down. It goes up and then back down again. At those low points, that's the population size. Populations really can't handle a lot of stress. Okay? Again, the optimal zone is what we call the Goldilocks zone. So what kind of conditions would cause this to happen? What are some of these again, ecological conditions that populations need just the right amount of, or else it becomes stressful? Type 1 or 2 in that you can think of while I drink more of my coffee. Exactly. Food, water. Now, a lot of people don't think of it like, if you have too much food, is that a bad thing? But it starts to rot, and then that rot leads to other things. Space is another one. Thank you, Dakota. What if you're in the water? What if you live in the ocean or a lake? Can't have too much water, technically. It's all around you, so that wouldn't be one. What's another thing it could be? Shelter, again, a place where you can live, call your own, protects you. Exactly. If your shelter is too small, then you feel cramped and you're not able to move around. If it's too big, then that kind of invites others in there. And so again, now you're going to have that stress. So the ones I came up with are similar to what you guys have. Think about this: sunlight. I live in Texas. That is definitely an ecological condition that I have to worry about. Okay, I live right here in Satan's armpit, where it's always hot and sweaty, and so too much sun can damage crops just as much as not enough sun can. The temperature, water. I wish I'd put some of the ones you guys had on there. Salinity. What is salinity again? Again, big fancy words, but what is salinity? Yeah, the amount of salt, exactly. So think of like a freshwater system. If it has too much salt in it, then those fish are not capable of withstanding that. It causes more, again, it's osmosis. To bring in my biology terms, it takes a lot of the water that's in the cells and pulls it out to balance it all out. So too much salt is a bad thing, and not enough salt is a bad thing. pH, again, looking at the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere that's being absorbed by the oceans, it is lowering the pH, which increases the acidity, and that right there is damaging the coral reefs. It's also damaging shells and fish too, right along with it. Any one of these could be called what we know as like a limiting factor. Okay, so what exactly is a limiting factor? Do you guys remember said term? I know if you guys covered this in class, this was a really long time ago. But what exactly is a limiting factor? And again, if I am going way too fast, please tell me to slow down. Ask questions. There's a little ask the question button. You can do it there, or you can just type it in the chat. I want to make sure that tonight is beneficial to anybody and everybody that is here. All right, so let me tell you about the limiting factors real quick. Okay. You guys ever see a pond that's green like this? Because you know it's not supposed to be. We have some around here that it happens like that during the summer times. So here's what a limiting factor is. Basically, it's anything that affects the environment if it's in short supply. Their abundance or their absence right there will affect the population growth. Okay. Yes, that picture that's on the right-hand side, that is eutrophication. So what exactly caused that eutrophication? Well, either abundance or lack of something caused that water to go green. So let's start with the green part first. What caused it to go green? Yeah, too much fertilizer. So too much of the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In this case, we usually consider that to be too much phosphorus. And so it got into that lake or that river, that stream. All the algae started to grow. That's why it's insanely bright and green. And from there, they tend to die off. The decomposers will destroy them and break them all up, using up all the oxygen, and then all the fish die. So yeah, that's basically eutrophication right there. Okay. That's what's going to cause all that fish death. Now, what's up with the teeny tiny little goldfish right there? That is right there at the surface of the water. What do you think that tiny little goldfish is doing? Yeah, you're right, Grace. He's getting air. So what would cause him to have to get air? Okay, I shouldn't have asked that question because it's just silly. He's trying to gulp air because there's not enough oxygen actually in that water right there. I've actually seen, usually you'll see this around the summertime when the temperature is very hot, or temperature is very high. And when that happens, water cannot hold as much oxygen. Hot water holds less oxygen than cold water. And so if he's in a, or she's in a body of water that's too warm and most of the oxygen is used up, you can actually see them coming up to the surface and then gulping air. And I had no clue about this until I actually went to college, and one of my professors told me. It's like I always just looked at the fish and thought they were dumb trying to eat things that they couldn't see. That's how smart I was. But yeah, because in this case now, oxygen in that water is going to be that limiting factor. If you have too much oxygen, that's just as bad as having not enough oxygen. And of course, if there's no oxygen, they're dead. Okay. So far, so good. Everyone's so cool with this ecological tolerance so far? Because I'm about to throw a couple words at you that are kind of annoying. All right. The intermediate disturbance hypothesis. Basically, what it looks like is having a little bit of disturbance is not very good for the amount of species there, or different varieties of species. Having too much disturbance is way too bad, but having just the right amount, you want like a medium level of disturbance. So basically, you want a medium level of stress in your environment, and that gives you the most amount of species diversity. Sounds really odd, but it kind of makes sense. If there's a little bit of a struggle, then you're going to fight more for your nutrients and all the rest of your factors out there. So, two words that come into play here are resistance. That is basically how much you don't, basically how much change is occurring. Okay. So when there's like a forest fire, how much change has occurred? And the lower amount of change means that there's a high resistance. They resisted the amounts of change. It's kind of like when the Starship Enterprise encountered the Borg. The Borg said resistance is futile. However, Captain Picard showed them differently. Yes, I am that level of geek. Ask your parents. They probably watch the show. The other word right here is resilience. It's how quickly you can bounce back because of that change. So I got to go to the beautiful, wonderful Yellowstone National Park a couple of times in my life. The very first time was way back in the, I want to say, early 80s, when I was still a wee little kid. And it was absolutely beautiful, awesome forest. Got to see the Old Faithful and all that. And then they had a massive major fire, late 80s. And I got to go back about 1992, 1993. I was able to, no, actually it was 1994. I remember now. It was after the fire. And you could see a lot of the trees were starting to grow back rather rapidly. It had only been about 6 or 7 years since the actual fire. That was high resilience. They were able to quickly bounce back from that disruption. So think of it kind of like today with our COVID-19 quarantines. We're looking at a whole bunch of the stock market was plummeting. It's starting to come back a little bit, but it's kind of doing this wavy thing. Everybody is trying to resist the change that's happening to them. Look at Florida. They're just now starting to shut down the state. Actually, as it is a recommendation. Please stay home. So they're resisting the change, which is not very good. Now we have to see what's the resilience. If something happens, again, we're looking at a whole massive thing happening to the U.S. How quickly can we bounce back? Okay, so this is, again, we're looking at ecological tolerance for us. Is that clear as mud for everybody? I feel like I'm just doing a lot of talking. Which, of course, I am doing a lot of talking. I realize that. Please, please, please type in the chat. Ask questions, agree, disagree, whatever it may be. Let me know that you're out there. Okay? So here is my next question. And yes, actually, it is. I had to try to find that photo. It wasn't hard to find that photo, actually. Are diseases considered a natural disaster? Now, think of this if it was an FRQ question. It has two parts. So you have to say yes or no. And then the second part is you have to explain. So take a moment. Do you consider diseases to be a natural disaster? And if you don't want to explain, you don't have to. This is not an FRQ. But think of it as one so that you can get the most amount of points, okay? All right. Dakota says yes, they're not man-made, or at least for the most part. Diseases are natural. Thank you. 100% yes. Awesome. Yeah, for the most part, and we don't usually tend to think of it. We think of the natural disasters as like earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes. But you're right. Technically, diseases could be a natural disaster, unless, of course, we're the ones that made it. And we've had very, very few of those. So, well, then we'll get into that. Okay. Let's see. Man, I think I'm going too fast through this tonight. I really do. Okay. So, you guys see is the GIF working on your screen? Is it animating? Yes? Okay, good. So, what is that GIF of? And yes, it's pronounced GIF and not GIF. The guy who invented it said so. Yeah, that's Pangea. So that right there is actually just showing that our planet has been changing. Yes, continental drift, it's been moving Our evidence of continental drift, of course, is looking at fossil records and all. But this right here shows us that our Earth is a dynamic system. It's constantly changing. And because of those changes, things have to adapt, right? So let's just talk about the natural disruptions to the ecosystem. First off, look at Africa. It's kind of centered on there. We know it's, basically the equator cuts it almost right through in the middle. But you notice that when it first starts, it's kind of like that bulbous shape right there. And then it rotates around. So thinking of the equator and its, sorry, my chair is squeaky. Thinking of the equator, the most amount of sunlight is right there, and the two tropics. It itself has changed dramatically over its lifespan. Okay, so again, the Earth, it is constantly changing. It is not a static system. Okay, and now some of these changes can be rather slow, like continental drift when we went from Pangea. And Pangea wasn't the only time the continents together. There was a previous one to that. Don't worry about its name. But some of the changes can also be rapid. If you want to think of like a tornado, that's a rapid change to a very localized ecosystem. Okay. Now, it comes in 3 different flavors. Okay, so think of it this way. Periodic change that happens again over certain periods of time. Like we think of hurricane season, where we know hurricane season will be between this month and this month, and it's almost every single year. Now, it's kind of shifting around a little bit, possibly due to global climate change, which is Unit 9, and that technically will not be on the test. We're all very sad about that. Really, we all as teachers are, because that's like the meat and potatoes of the whole class. The second is episodic. So it's not a certain thing that happens all the time, but there are certain episodes that volcanic eruptions can happen. Yeah, they're not technically on a set schedule, but they do happen, and there is some forewarning to them. Unlike random, which is like lightning strikes and technically tornadoes and such. Do you have any other items that could be placed into the periodic, episodic, or random events for natural disruptions? And if you do, please type that into the little chat window for me. Just because I didn't put it on there does not mean it's not an actual thing. I was just trying to put a couple things in there. Tsunami? Yeah. Okay, so tsunami, what would that one be as? While you're answering that, or somebody else is answering it. Tornado season is periodic. Yeah, we technically have a tornado season, but there are other ones that sporadically just pop up. Tsunami, I don't think would be a periodic thing unless I don't know of tsunamis that are constantly occurring in certain times. I thought it would be random, but again, I'm not fully versed on tsunami. Wildfires, that would also be a random one right there. Although we have been seeing that they're becoming more periodic. If you look at California and areas around there, we'll see that there is technically a wildfire season. So that would be almost a periodic thing. Okay, so thank you, Saba. Yeah, again, as I was saying, that there are occurrences of just random wildfires that have occurred, but like I said, in California and a few other places, it's becoming a seasonal thing. You're right. Blizzards are definitely periodic in certain places. Earthquakes, I would put those as the episodic, because there's a buildup that goes towards it. It's not just a random thing, although it kind of feels like it, but there are telltale signs of it about to occur, just like the volcanoes. Awesome. I love it when I want to call you all my students. I love it when my students interact with me. It's a lot more fun than just sitting here talking for an hour. Flooding, again, you're looking at times of both periodic and episodic. So if this was to be placed on like an FRQ, and they ask you for examples, make sure you explain why it's, if you chose it to be periodic, why it's that, or if you chose it to be episodic, or whatever the question is. Okay, always make sure you put that explain. If they ask for explain, if it's just an identification or ID something, that's perfectly fine. Just put it in there. But if I ask for you to explain, at least one or two of those points goes right into the explanation portion of the FRQ. So it's very, very important. I've been a reader for, what, 4 years? Five? I don't remember now. 4 or 5 years. Yeah, something. Yeah. Anyway, so it's tiny little nitpicky things that lose students a point or two. Again, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world. You just have to get more points than the other people around you. Okay, you don't have to be the fastest person to outrun the monster. You just have to trip your friends. Don't trip your friends on FRQs, but you get the idea. Alrighty. Oh, I didn't make anything pop up on this one. It just all displays all at the same time. So because our Earth is constantly changing, one of the things that they put into what we call the CED, or the curriculum. Anyway, our little design right here, the things that we need to be teaching. I'm having brain fart moments. That's what happens when you don't have to think for like 2.5 weeks. As the Earth changes, we kind of tend to forget about the fact that ocean levels are constantly changing as well. If you'll notice, I have on there, have you guys ever heard of Snowball Earth? Have any of your teachers discussed Snowball Earth with you before? No? Oh, good. I get to teach something brand new. This I thought was fascinating. I do not remember exactly when it happened, but it was way before dinosaurs and all that. The majority of the planet was covered in ocean. Okay, we didn't have a lot of the continental uplift, and we started to have. It was a period of time where the atmosphere itself was starting to cool. There was probably more cloud cover and all that, and the glaciers on the north and southern hemisphere, they started to grow and build, and eventually it covered the entire planet. They met in the middle, right there at the equator, and the entire globe was covered in glacier. There was a couple little places that were open, but it wasn't very much. So imagine the sea levels. In order to make all that ice, the ice the water got sucked up into this glacier. So ocean levels dramatically dropped. And we're looking at tens of miles of ocean drop because it was all stored in this hard ice. So that's what we call the snowball Earth. And then eventually over time, because there was less actual atmospheric water, there was less clouds, it started to warm up again. Again, it took I believe quite a few centuries, if not a couple of millennia, and started to melt again and put the ice back into the waters. But we've seen glaciers advance and retreat, and as those glaciers do, our ice ages, as the glaciers advance, they're drawing in water. They're not actually drawing in, but you have to have more water in order to create this massive movement of ice. So the sea levels will actually lower. So that gives us totally brand new coastlines and everything else. And as they melt, all that water goes back into the ocean. It'll expand. Now, the glaciers that are actually sitting on the water, they're not going to change the actual amount of sea level rise and fall. Think of your glass with ice in it. Okay, and when the ice melts, has the level of whatever soda you're drinking or iced tea, does that change when the ice melts? That's not a rhetorical question. You get to answer while I take a drink of my coffee. Does the level of your iced tea change? Well, condensation is on the outside of it, but think about what's happening on the inside. Does that level change when all the ice cubes melt? No, it really doesn't. Because the same amount of water is locked into that ice cube, when it melts, it does not actually change. So if you think I'm lying to you, which I try to get my students to call me out on my crap if I'm spewing nonsense, try it. Get you a cup of ice, put some water in it, mark off the level, and let the ice melt. Okay, do not heat up the water. Don't heat up the water, because what will happen is we have thermal expansion. As temperatures rise, the water molecules will spread apart, and that's what will give us more expansion. Okay, so don't let it heat up technically. Don't put it in the microwave and boil it or whatever. But just let it sit out there. Come back the next day and see if I'm actually right or wrong. Okay. Exactly. It's kind of like the volume and the weight and the mass of the ice. Exactly. Displacement. Sweet. See, we're bringing in physics. My physics teachers that I teach with would be so happy because I don't deal with physics. Don't get me wrong. I like physics, but I don't want to. Okay, here's another question I got for y'all tonight. How have your pets, and this is a legitimate question because it goes into what we're talking about, how have your pets adapted to you quarantine life? Because I've seen insane amounts of memes out there with this. How have your pets adapted to quarantine life? They're loving it. Awesome. One of my favorite memes is there is a dog up on top of the countertops. And it says, I do not want to go for another walk. We've had 20 walks today, Bob. I'm not leaving this house again. Oh, you're the only pet in here. Well, Saba, how have you been? How have you been adapting to your? Actually, let's change the question. Not just your pets. How have y'all been adapting to quarantine life? Obviously, this has been a massive change in your system. What changes have you seen? Some people are not liking it. I was totally cool with it. And then like today hit and it was like, I was starting to be depressed. I was like, these are the same four walls. I don't like going out, but like none of my friends are online because they're all essential workers. And so they have to be at work. And I just get to sit with my Xbox and my TV. You can't really see it there. My bad. So the reason why I asked, okay, all your friends are seniors. Yeah, that's heartbreaking to, some people don't get to, like some of the teachers I've talked with, they really hope we get to go back to school soon because they want to see those graduating seniors. They've talked to them for 4 years, or technically 3 2/3 of a year. So at least we get to have video conferencing. That's not a bad thing. It's not the best in the world. But again, that's one of those adaptations that even schools had to do. We had to change our model in order to technically survive. Unfortunately, not all animals will actually be like that. Oh, I'm quite sure you'll get another social life. I promise you, when one goes away, another one almost always comes back. Okay? But, you'll still have your friends. They're just, at a different school. Think of it that way. That's the best thing. Like, yeah, you can call your mom. My mother called me during my class time one time. That was fun because I answered it. Don't do that. But the reason why I asked this question is because not actually all animals are actually able to adapt like we are doing right now. And most people think of adaptations in the wrong sense. So let me explain. Who's this rather handsome bearded dude right here? That's right. That's old Chucky D right there, Charles Darwin. The reason why I have him on there is because I want to talk about the idea of what adaptations are. Okay. Of course, organisms are going to be affected by changes in the environment. It's a foregone conclusion right there. They are going to have to do something. Now, some of those changes can be taken care of just by changing behavior, but others, they won't be able to do. So like a sudden long-term change can be devastating. So think of right now, the polar ice caps are melting. It is a proven fact. We've seen them. They are receding. We're seeing more and more open waters in at the North Pole. What's happening to the polar bears? What is happening to the polar bears at the North Pole? We're seeing a lot less of them. My students say, well, why can't we just like move them to the South Pole? You can't take the polar bears to the South Pole. But it's cold there. That's great. That's not the only thing that they have to worry about. Look at their food source. Not a problem, Tanya. You're good. We're not check and roll, I promise. And this recap will be up late tonight and early tomorrow. So, you can always go back and double check the things that you missed. There's more than just the cold that the polar bears need. They need certain types of food, and those are not seen in the South Pole. So you can't just move the polar bears. So that's the reason why we're seeing less polar bears. They're not able to adapt quick enough to that change. And again, an adaptation is a genetic change or genetic mutations. Okay, so let me get onto that again. A slow change, a slow, gradual change can allow populations to survive if they happen to have the right type of mutations. Okay. Again, we think of this as survival of the fittest. Look at this little whale right here. This is an actual whale skeleton. What's circled near the tail end? What is that little circle trying to highlight to you? It is not the fish. That's a good guess, though. It'd be about the right size for a fish. That's its hip bone. That right there is its hip bone. Whales have hips. I know, it's silly, right? Think about it. So what we saw is, and I couldn't get the image that shows the entire lineage of the whale, but what happens was whales were land creatures. They looked like a weird little striped tiger thingy. And then over time, they got more and more elongated. Their heads became more and more aerodynamic. Their legs started to become more, their fingers elongated and became flippers. And the reason why this was happening is they were starting to be crowded on it. There was more and more competition on land for the foods that they eat. But in the water, there was less of that competition around their areas. So they started walking into the lands. So yeah, okay, so your human ears, actually the bones, not necessarily the ear itself, but inside your ear are three bones, the incus, the malleus, and the stapes. Those were parts of the gill arches. And some people, and I don't happen to have one, but some people will have a tiny little hole near this little flappy thing of their ear. And that right there is actually a gill hole that some people still have. The first whale was a carnivore. Actually, if you think of it, all the whales still are carnivores. There's no vegetarian whales out there, at least not that I know of. So again, as they went into the ocean, they had these, some of them had these random mutations that allowed them to survive better. That's what the slow, gradual change is over time. I was watching a movie the other day. It was talking about the slow, gradual change. You have time, again, with these random genetic mutations, which are very rare to begin with. If you happen to have the right adaptations or the right genetic mutations, you have a better chance to survive. That's why I have Chucky D on there. The whole idea of adaptation is not just a change of thinking. In order to allow the population to survive, there has to be genetic changes that give you new traits. And so right now, because our polar ice caps are melting at quite an alarming rate, the polar bears are not able to adapt to that change because the majority of them don't have this right adaptation to live anywhere other than that one specific environment. No, I haven't talked about the Galapagos finches. They themselves were a sign of adaptations as well. Technically, you don't. They go into so many different things with the Galapagos finches when it comes to stuff like that. I would just review them. In fact, actually, the only thing I would really, really worry about is that it's called adaptive radiation. So one started it, and then there's lots of different organisms that came out, lots of different finches. And it is because of going back to ecological tolerance. Some of them could not resist the changes that were happening in the environment, or there was too much competition. And some, again, had this adaptations that you have a slightly bigger beak, you can eat slightly bigger food. Slightly smaller beak, you slightly smaller food. And it's all about less competition. Because, again, ecological changes can create a lot of competition if it wipes out food sources or other limiting factors that we looked at earlier, briefly. Okay. Good questions. Thank you, Tanya. All the good comments, too. Thank you all. I know it's getting time. Most of my coffee is almost gone. Yeah, almost spilled it. Okay. So yeah, would I recommend knowing about the finches? Just very briefly. Again, we're going to know a lot more about the AP exam Friday. So head to Twitter, and actually there probably will be a email sent out to your teachers. Possibly, I'm not sure if you all got an email discussing that there's going to be changes, but there will be links all throughout the social media spheres discussing it. So, Alrighty. Dang, I think this is my last one. I am going way too fast. Either means I need to just slow down or I get to eat dinner early tonight. One of the two. All right. Also, there's more times for questions and answers. All right. Here's my last topic for tonight. Here's my last question for that topic. Imagine that all the people in the entire planet disappeared. It wasn't that they died and their bodies are there. No, literally, no more people. Gone. Whatever you're doing, done. What's your neighborhood going to look like? Yeah, ecological succession. But think about your specific neighborhood. How is it going to be rampage there, Grace? Concrete jungle. Okay. It is going to be secondary succession. Awesome. What's rampaging your neighborhood, Grace? If I may be so inquisitive here. Bunny rabbits? That would be kind of scary. Ravaging hordes of bunny rabbits tore through the neighborhood. Overrun by moss. Okay, so I don't think you understand moss as well as I do there, Tanya, because they were a very slow growing thing. Maybe in 100 years, you'd have like that much more moss. Moss and lichens are like insanely slow growing. I love taking pictures of. Oh, don't say whoops. Don't worry about it. No, there's no problems here. But yeah, moss, they're very slow growing. But you're right. Everyone's right. There are going to be lots more animals are going to be running around. You're going to see plants, weeds just sprouting up. Like right now, if I do not go out tomorrow morning with my little weed whacker and take care of the sidewalk in front of my house and my little walking path in the back of my house, I'm not going to see it again because it is so overgrown because I haven't been, battling it back. And so if all people are gone, there's no more people to battle the plants or the other animals that are part of our world. Okay. You're right. As we get more bunnies, there's going to be, so as one organism increases it near the bottom of a food pyramid or food chain, that allows for more growth above it too. Exactly. So, right, we're talking about ecological succession. Okay. This right here happens to be primary succession. And how do you know it's primary succession? We'll go into the actual definition of what succession is, but how do you know this one's primary and not secondary? Primary means nothing pre-existing, no pre-existing soil. Starts with rocks and moss. Awesome. There wasn't anything there before. Yeah, there was nothing established in that area, with the exception of very few instances, which I'll go over. Okay, we always start off with rock. There's no soil. And actually, you can kind of see on my little diagram how the soil will increase over time and the amount of rock decreases, the bedrock decreases. That's our primary succession. So what does it mean to succeed? You are overcoming. You basically, if you look at every one of these tiny little Roman numerals, think of them as little snapshots in time. And you can see that they're all slightly different from each other. Normally, when we look at ecological succession, we kind of just focus on the plants, but it's not just the plants. Please don't think that, okay? It's going to be more than just the plants. So we are going to start off with just rock. Our pioneer species, think of the pioneers that headed west to colonize or basically to kind of infiltrate the western frontier here. Those pioneers were the first things there. So our very first technical organisms, our living life forms, are going to be the moss and the lichens. And they're there specifically in order to break down. Oh, no. I'm glad you're back here. We haven't covered much, I promise you. They are going to break down that rock. Now, the rock is totally needed so that we can get more soil. The cool thing about the moss and the lichens, specifically the lichens, they happen to be a symbiotic relationship between the algae and a fungus. The algae happens to be able to do photosynthesis. Excuse me. And so with photosynthesis, it makes sugars. The fungi use those sugars in order to grow a little bit. And as they grow, they have these little mycorrhizae, kind of like roots. And as they go in through the cracks and crevices of the rocks, as they grow, they expand. They break the rocks. Also, there's a little bit of acid that they secrete, and that helps to break down the rock. So over time, these rocks go from boulders and smaller bits and pieces. As you mix those bits and pieces up with the decayed moss and lichens as they grow and die, eventually we start to make soil. And then, of course, if you'll notice, looks like little teeny tiny little truffula trees in there in Roman numeral 3. We're going to get small little weeds and grasses and all that, things that don't need very much soil. Now, think of what type of animals would live in small grasses and weed-like areas. Because again, when we talk about ecological succession, it's not just the plants, the flora. We have to think about the fauna as well. So what organisms would technically live in grasslands? Short little grass. I do mean short grass too. Insects. Okay. That's a good start. We're going to see mice because they're going to eat the grass seeds and the insects. Awesome. So now let's go into Roman numeral 4. We're starting to get taller. Oh yes, don't forget the snakes. We're going to get taller grasses. Gophers? I'm not sure about the gophers because most of the ones I know of, they have to dig underground for their burrows. So they may be in Roman numeral 4 or 5 or beyond. But yeah, you can, and again, these are just snapshots of certain occasions. It's going to be a whole continuum. So somewhere between 3 and 5, gophers would totally be introduced into the system. Okay. Yes, and the prairie dogs. I know, typos and all that. I just wanted to tease you a little bit. I haven't had anybody to tease, and my kid is like 4 inches taller than me. I can't really tease him very well. When he teases, it hurts. He doesn't physically abuse me, but just standing next to me really hurts my feelings. I've always been the tallest person in my family. It's nothing to laugh at, okay? Seriously, no. That's just being mean, which my son tells me I'm mean to him all the time. His ego's yeah. My ego's way taller than he is, but he's getting there. So if you'll look, let's look at what kind of organisms would live, like we said, in like 3 or 4 right there. Compared to the organisms you would see in Roman numeral 7, that climax community, that mature forest that's really not changing. What type of organisms are we going to see that's different? I'm sorry, Sabai. Short's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I used to tease people for being short, and you know what? Now that I'm the medium-sized person in my family, it's not fun. Yes, great. So you're going to see a lot more mammals. Okay, but what type of mammals? Are you still going to see the mice? Yeah, you're going to see usually bigger ones, with the exception of like bison. You're going to see the bisons in like 4, and it's because if they tried running through the forest, they would hurt themselves. Elk and deer, bears are going to be seen a lot more in the forest areas. Yeah, so you can see it's not just the changing of the plants there. With different varieties of plants, we have different varieties of animals too. Exactly. All right. And yes, please consider the insects to be animals. They are animals. Even though insects can kind of be seen throughout the whole area, there are lots of different, like you wouldn't see a leafcutter ant or anything like that in like 3 or 4, even 5. You're going to see those more towards the 6 and 7s. Okay. Now, the reason why it takes well over 1,000 years, of course, is because you have to break down that rock. You have to get enough soil to start off to get those lovely little plants and all that. Wouldn't there be a bigger variety of decomposers too? Technically, but for our test, mostly just think of like the 2 main decomposers. There's bacteria and there's fungi. Okay, unless you're talking about detritivores, which are like the worms and stuff like that. There are going to be a lot different scavengers that you'd find as you go beyond. But for decomposers, just focus on the main 2. The main ones being bacteria and fungi. Okay, those are your go-to decomposers that anybody will totally accept. Okay, I promise you that. All right, so that was primary succession. Let's go into the other one, secondary succession. Oh wait, I did want to say one other thing. With primary, You guys mentioned that there's no previous life that existed or previous existing soil. There's one or two exceptions. Think of the glaciers. As the glaciers advance, they're going to be pushing all of that soil up and out of the way. And then as they retreat, it's nothing but rock. So because of glaciers, where they retreat, you're going to technically have primary succession there. So there was a previous existing ecosystem, but it all got pushed out of the way, and now you went right down to the bedrock. That's the only time that there was something pre-existing. But again, we have to start all over because all the soil's gone. All right, so now secondary succession. Okay, there was some sort of natural disaster here. There was pre-existing soil. I always think of, I like alliteration, so secondary succession is soil. Yeah, there was a soil of some sort. We had an existing ecosystem. It might have been a forest, may have been a grassland. Next door to me, the house burnt down, and so they pulled everything away. They pulled the concrete slab and everything else, and everything started to grow back again. And they rarely mow it, so we have lots of small little bushes. We're basically in stage 3 or 4 of primary succession over there. On this one, we're in stage, getting close, between 5 and 6. I hope they mow it soon. But again, this is secondary succession. Not much of a difference, except for there was some sort of disaster. Could be fire, flood, lots of different things. Volcanic eruptions, it depends. If it is just the ash that lands and destroys things, or just the explosion of it itself, kind of like what we see at Mount St. Helens, then that's going to be secondary. If for some reason that there's some lava and that lava covers areas, that's hardened rock, and so that rock will have to be broken down. Usually the outer edges of it will be broken down quicker than the middle section because you have existing life on either side of that lava flow. So again, kind of needs a little bit of description when you're answering things like that. But yeah, if there happens to be rock there, that has to be broken down before life forms other than moss and lichens can go there. So yeah, it can go either way. Again, just if they ask, always explain your answer. Okay. And that's one of the biggest things. If we're clueless as to what in the world is this kid talking about, we continue to read, we look at what their explanation is. And that right there can make or break, so long as your explanation is correct. If you don't feel like you need an explanation, don't give it. It could take points away. Just, the sky is blue, but really it's green. Don't do that. Don't contradict yourself. Stick to your guns. All right, so again, we start off with soil of some sort. So there's that whole period of time of breaking down rocks that we don't have to worry about anymore. Our new pioneer species now, there's soil. So we can have grass. We can have small bushes and all that, shrubbery, if you will, that can be in there. That's why you can see a variety of different things in, I keep using my mouse on my screen like y'all can see it, and I know you can't. In panel number 5, you can see that maybe there's some tiny little trees that are growing in the far background, some tall grasses and all that. This one's a lot less time-worthy because we already have the soil. The majority of primary succession is breaking down the rock to get to the soil. So we already have the soil. We don't have to worry about it. We're good. Okay. But you're going to see the same types of organisms here from grasses on. All right, so the question is lichen during primary or secondary? Lichens are normally going to be a primary succession thing. They have to break down the rocks in order to create the soil that's usable by the rest of the ecosystem. Now, if there happens to be rocks in our secondary ecosystem right here, our secondary succession, then yeah, you can see lichens too, but they're not considered to be pioneer species. Pioneers are the first forms of plant life in the area. Okay, does that help you understand it a little bit better? You can see them in both, but they're only the pioneer species of primary. Awesome. Alrighty, so here's technically my last little bit I want to talk about. Hope it's last bit. Yeah, I think it is. Let's call it Keystone species. Okay, this is where it lies in here. Keystone species, we see it here. We also see it in like Unit 9, but it really makes a lot of sense right here. the keystone species is just like you see on the archway. If you were to pull out that lovely little keystone, that whole arch is going to collapse. And you're right. If they die, the rest of the ecosystem could either possibly collapse, or at least it's going to be dramatically negatively affected. Some really good examples, of course. I know you guys can't click on the link, but it will be in. Let's see if I'll link it here in a few minutes for y'all. If you just do a search for wolves change rivers, you're going to see a lovely little 4-minute video of how the wolf in Yellowstone National Park, when they reintroduced them, literally changed the shape of the river that went through the park. It was just insane. Let's see. Are they generally in the middle of the food web? Not necessarily. Some of them, like the wolf, it's an apex predator. You could, for the most part, I think you're going to see them near the middle or to the top. Another example is going to be beavers. So again, like you're going with, it's kind of in the middle. Their dams create new habitats, reduce the amount of flow downriver, but stop up the water upriver and creates new new lake habitats and such. My favorite one to talk about with my freshman bio students are the sea urchins being eaten up by the otters. Sea urchins themselves will totally destroy a kelp bed. Excuse me. So when otters were removed, there was less otters in the system because hunters were capturing them for their pelts. The sea urchins just increased in numbers and decimated the kelp beds. But when the otters came back, they controlled the sea urchin population, and the sea urchins populations went down, and that increased the kelp bed. And with more kelp, there was more hiding places, there was more food sources. So lots of different organisms came back. And it's all because of one organism. The otter was brought back in. Same thing with the wolf. It actually helped control the deer population, which allowed there to be more berries on the trees. And since there was more berries on the trees, there was more bears, which again was good for the rest of the ecosystem. They help to control a lot of things. So again, this keystone species is a very important concept that with their removal, their removal is negatively affected on the ecosystem right there. Okay. Last but not least is what we call an indicator species. We look at these as the measurement of health in an ecosystem. Okay. Technically, if they have to have a high population, that means the health is good because they have enough resources. If their population is low, there is something to be concerned about. And the ones that we usually look at are going to be your macroinvertebrates, like insects in the water, your some of your freshwater shrimp and such like that, because they're very susceptible to changes, and they're very susceptible to the amount of toxins in the water too. Amphibians are my favorite one to talk about with my professors. If you look at the salamanders, most of them are, half of their day is in the water or outside the water. You're going to be able to see that. All right, let me double check. Let me click on that link and see if that's the one I was thinking of. There's quite a few out there. My friends need to quit chatting. There we go. Let's see. I'm clicking on your link right now there. Usually it makes my dog start to... Of course, I'm going to watch a YouTube advertisement first. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. So, take a moment. It only costs you about 4 minutes of your life, but it's a good little understanding of what an ecosystem's keystone species is. Okay. Are indicator species generally at the top of the food web? Oh, gosh, no. Indicator species are very, very low on that food web. Okay. Your keystones are going to be mid to top, but your indicators are going to be very, very low on the food web. Think that they're more in tune with nature. They have more of a connection to the base elements of water and the soils and all that. So again, your indicators are going to be insanely low. They're going to be probably your primary consumers, if nothing else. So, wow, I did make it to 7 o'clock without too much blabbering. Hey, do y'all have any more questions for me? Because this is the end, of course. Let me always want you guys to think about us. All right, what questions you got for me? All right, so question is, if the indicator species population booms, doesn't that mean that whatever consumes them is gone? Not necessarily. So they'll, if they see the population is skyrocketed, usually again that's a sign of good health for the ecosystem. What they'll do is they will, of course, have to go look at what's happening to the numbers of organisms that do eat them. It's not just, think of it as the start of an indicator. Of course, you'll have to look at other factors, but just their population increasing. Now, if it is, like you say, if it's a boom, a sudden increase, then yeah, there is usually a sign of concern that their predators are gone. But if it's a slow, gradual increase, and all the rest of the signs are good, the predators haven't increased or anything like that, for the most part, then usually that means that the ecosystem is healthy. Now, they don't tend to go beyond, because think of it as the carrying capacity graph. If you go above carrying capacity, you are, again, above that level of materials that are available in the ecosystem. So if you go above that, of course, you're going to have to crash. So what they start to go up, meeting that carrying capacity, then they're good. If they go above it, of course, that's the bad thing. That's, again, normally you would see, lack of predators and such. So don't think of it as a boom. Think of them increasing up to their maximum point for the ecosystem. So it's more than population that makes them an indicator species. For the most part, they start looking at the actual population number. That right there, it's not just one indicator. They're the start of the indicator, so that they can see what is happening. Excuse me, in the rest of the ecosystem. Could you clarify the difference between a keystone and indicator? Keystone species are essential for an ecosystem, and they have great, massive effects on the ecosystems around them. Again, with a beaver, the beaver right there builds his little beaver dam, its lodge, and because of that, behind that lodge, upriver, now we have flooded the area. So yeah, the things that live there are kind of losing a home, but now we've opened up this area to more aquatic life forms, and those aquatic life forms will bring in other things that eat them. If that beaver has disappeared, that entire ecosystem literally just washes right down the drain. Now, an indicator species is very similar to, let me go back to the image I had right here. It's kind of like your fuel gauge, okay? Or your temperature gauge on a car or something like that. As it goes up, it's telling you, the population is going up. Hey, everything's going fine. If the population goes down, that's usually a cause for concern. When your fuel gauge goes down, that's a cause of concern. You look at the fuel gauge, then you start looking at how many miles you have left to go on your trip or whatever. So this is an indicator, hey, something is happening. We need to investigate. Whereas the keystone species, they are, again, the effects. They are the effectors of change. Does that help? One thumbs up for that. Okay. Everyone seems to be good. All right, then. Well, then I think I'm going to have some dinner. I know as an apes teacher, I'm not supposed to, but I got steak. It was on sale. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope everything was beneficial for you tonight. I hope you guys are feeling healthy and hope you're feeling well. I'm hoping that COVID-19 is not going to dramatically affect your life for much longer. Flatten that curve. Take care of yourselves. Social distancing. And of course, give your pets some love. I got to go see my dogs. Okay? Being vegan, a big best on steak. Hey, I congratulate anybody who goes vegetarian or vegan. I don't think I have the willpower to do that, but my hat tips off to you on that one. These are your first AP tests. Awesome. Hey, I hope you do well, Tanya. I hope you, after you find out your grades, I hope you guys do great and come back and give us some feedback. All right. All right. Oh, mistake. Oh, okay. My bad. I didn't even see that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys have a great rest of your time. If you're in my cram sessions, I'll see you next week, Monday. If not, then hopefully you'll attend next week, Wednesday's live stream with us, okay? Have a great one. See you later. Ta-ta for now. Peace out, my homies.